January 26, 1966, Australia Day. The sun was shining, the beaches were crowded, and three young siblings, Jane, Arnna, and Grant Beaumont, set off for a fun-filled morning at Glenelg Beach. It was a trip they had taken many times before, but this time, they never came home. As the afternoon turned to evening, their mother, Nancy Beaumont, began to worry. The children were expected home by noon, but noon came and went. Then 2 p.m. Then 3. With each passing hour, fear took hold. Their father, Jim, returned from work, expecting to see his children playing, but the house was eerily silent. When night fell, the sickening realization set in: something was terribly wrong. A desperate search began, but no one could have predicted that this was just the beginning of one of Australia's greatest mysteries. The disappearance of the Beaumont children. Welcome to InsightWave, the channel that delves into both solved and unsolved cases from around the world. If you haven't already, please take a moment to like and subscribe to stay up to date with the latest crime stories delivered straight to your inbox. By 1955, Grant Beaumont, better known to friends as Jim, was a man enjoying life's simple pleasures. A former Australian Army veteran, he had recently returned to South Australia after serving overseas and had settled into a steady job as a taxi driver for the local cab company, Suburban Taxis. Owning several vehicles, Jim worked long hours, determined to provide a comfortable life for himself and his future family. One particular evening, after a successful day at the horse races, Jim walked into the Victoria Hotel on Hindley Street in the heart of Adelaide. The vibrant atmosphere of the hotel buzzed with laughter and conversation, but Jim's attention was drawn to a striking woman seated at a table with another couple. She had a warm presence and a natural beauty that made her stand out. Summoning his courage, Jim approached her and introduced himself. The woman, smiling, responded, "I'm Nancy Ellis." The connection between them was instant, their conversation flowing effortlessly. Nancy, at 28 years old, had an engaging personality and a kind heart that complemented Jim's easygoing charm. Their romance blossomed quickly, and within just 6 weeks of dating, Jim proposed. By December 1955, they were married, beginning what seemed to be a picture-perfect life together. 9 months later, in September 1956, their first child, Jane, was born. The young couple embraced parenthood with joy, and soon their family grew. In November 1958, they welcomed their second daughter, Arnna Kathleen. Their third and final child, a boy named Grant Ellis after his father, was born in July 1961. The Beaumonts were the quintessential Australian family of the 1960s, hard-working, close-knit, and full of love. By 1966, Jim, now 41, had transitioned from driving taxis to a career in sales, working as a traveling salesman for a linen company. Meanwhile, Nancy, 39, dedicated herself to raising their 3 young children at home. 9-year-old Jane Beaumont was a bright and responsible child, wise beyond her years. Described by her parents as mature and well-spoken, Jane was an avid reader and a lover of poetry, often writing her own verses in a notebook she carried with her. She dreamed of one day becoming an author or a teacher. Her calm and composed nature often made others forget she was still just a child. However, when she got excited, her polished demeanor would break momentarily, and she would stutter slightly, a trait her family found endearing. As the eldest sibling, Jane embraced her role as the protector of her younger brother and sister. She was like a little mother to them, Nancy would later recall. Jane's sense of responsibility was so strong that her parents felt comfortable allowing her and her siblings to take short, local trips without direct adult supervision, a common practice in the safe and trusting suburban environment of 1960s Adelaide. 7-year-old Arnna was the free spirit of the Beaumont children. Outgoing and imaginative, she could entertain herself for hours with make-believe stories and elaborate games. She loved dancing, dress-ups, and organizing small concerts at home, often enlisting her brother and sister as her reluctant co-stars. She had this way of lighting up a room, Nancy once said. You couldn't help but smile when she was around. Arnna's playful and affectionate nature made her a joy to be around, and she enjoyed making new friends wherever she went. Though different in personality from Jane, she deeply admired her older sister and trusted her completely. At just 4 years old, Grant Beaumont Jr. was the baby of the family. A sweet and gentle boy, he idolized his father and mimicked his every move. Jim would often find Grant following him around the house, pretending to be his little assistant. He was always at my heels, Jim once fondly remembered. He wanted to do everything I did. One of Grant's favorite pastimes was riding around in his red go-kart, pretending it was a taxi just like the ones his father had once driven. The whole family adored him, and his playful innocence brought a special warmth to their home. Despite Jim's demanding job as a traveling salesman, which often kept him on the road for days at a time, he remained deeply connected to his family. To bridge the distance, Jane would write him letters detailing the little happenings of their days. Jim cherished these letters, keeping them tucked in his briefcase and reading them each night as a reminder of home. One such letter read, "Dear loving Daddy. When Auntie Tolly came down to stay with us yesterday, we went to the Goodwood pool last night. Arnna and Grant swam in the toddler's pool, which was up to my waist, but Auntie, Mummy, and I swam in the 3-foot 6-inch pool. While we were there, I learned how to open my eyes under the water for a long time. I also learned how to kick my legs, make my arms float, and do a graceful dive. Auntie Tolly taught me all of it. Tonight, I had a hot pie, Fritz and sauce sandwich, and rainbow ice cream. Auntie Tolly bought a great big roast chicken from her father for nothing. Most of all, I want to wish you much luck with your hot, tiring work. Well, goodbye, I have to go now. Loving Jane." Jim and Nancy prioritized family time whenever possible. Holidays were a cherished tradition, and they often took their children on caravanning trips across South Australia and Victoria. One memorable journey led them along the Great Ocean Road, where they stopped at the 12 Apostles, a stunning natural landmark on Victoria's west coast. In a treasured family photograph, Jane and Arnna sit on either side of young Grant, all three smiling happily against the backdrop of towering limestone stacks and the rolling ocean waves. It was a moment of pure joy, one that Jim and Nancy would later cling to as they tried to comprehend the unimaginable loss that lay ahead. The Beaumonts' love for one another was undeniable. They were a family that laughed together, traveled together, and supported one another. But on January 26, 1966, their world was shattered forever. By 1966, the Beaumont family was living the Australian dream. Their suburban home on Harding Street in Somerton Park allowed them to take advantage of the iconic Aussie beach lifestyle. The seaside suburb of Glenelg was only a 20-minute walk away, and the Beaumonts, like many others, were regular visitors during the warmer months. That morning, Jane, Arnna, and Grant walked to the bus stop on Diagonal Road, catching the 10:10 a.m. bus to Glenelg Beach. Once they arrived, they played in the sand and swam in the cool, inviting waters. Before noon, the children stopped by a local shop, purchasing mixed lollies with some of their change. Witnesses later reported seeing them smiling and laughing, enjoying their treats as they walked toward the beach again. They were due to return home on the midday bus, but they never arrived. That afternoon, Nancy waited anxiously at the Diagonal Road bus stop, her eyes scanning every passing bus for her children. By 3 p.m., with no sign of them, a growing dread began to settle in. Frantic, Nancy and Jim Beaumont rushed to the Glenelg police station at approximately 7:30 p.m. A constable took down descriptions of the missing Beaumont children, reassuring their worried parents that everything would be fine. The idea of an abduction involving 3 children was unheard of at the time, so the officer believed they had simply lost track of time, gotten lost, or been involved in a minor accident. Nonetheless, he reported the case to police headquarters in Adelaide. Jim Beaumont returned home to Harding Street, hoping his children had made it back in his absence. But when he arrived, they were still nowhere to be found. Soon after, 2 police officers arrived to search the Beaumont house, suspecting the children might be hiding to avoid getting in trouble for missing curfew. When the search turned up nothing, the officers questioned Nancy Beaumont, asking for detailed descriptions of the children and their clothing. Nancy described her eldest, 9-year-old Jane, as 4 feet 6 inches tall, thin, with freckles and sun-bleached hair cut to her ears, with a fringe pushed back. 7-year-old Arnna was 4 feet 0 inches, of plump build, with suntanned skin and short dark brown hair. 4-year-old Grant was 3 feet 0 inches, thin, with short brown hair, an olive complexion, and deeply suntanned skin. With this information, police launched a search of Glenelg and surrounding areas, accompanied by a frantic Jim Beaumont. They combed the beaches of Glenelg, Somerton, West Beach, Seacliff, and Brighton, looking for any sign of the children or their belongings, a green beach bag, towels, and clothes. The scorching summer heat made the search difficult, as the beaches remained packed late into the night. Jim quickly dismissed the theory that his children had drowned, later stating, "The beaches were packed, and the sea was calm. One child might drown, but all 3 together. I just can't imagine that. There would have been some evidence, clothes, their beach bag, something. But there was nothing." As darkness fell, police called off the search until morning. Unable to bear the thought of returning home without his children, Jim continued searching alone until 7 a.m. Meanwhile, Nancy remained at home, kept company by concerned friends and neighbors. As news of the disappearance spread via late-night radio and television reports, she became overwhelmed with guilt, blaming herself for allowing them to go to the beach alone. The anxiety was so intense that a doctor was called to administer a strong sedative. When Jim finally returned home after hours of fruitless searching, he found his wife asleep in a chair, her face stained with tears. At first light on January 27, the search for Jane, Arnna, and Grant resumed. 5 rescue boats scanned the Glenelg shoreline while officers searched on foot, combing through storm drains, sand dunes, and dense scrub. Police expanded their efforts, conducting door-to-door searches of homes, backyards, sheds, and vacant properties. To spread awareness, police issued detailed descriptions of the children and their clothing to the media. Patrol cars fitted with loudspeakers drove through Glenelg, broadcasting calls for assistance. By mid-morning, Jim Beaumont, visibly exhausted and grief-stricken, addressed the press from his home's back porch, pleading, "It's a complete mystery. I can't understand it. My kids will be crying their eyes out. It's like a nightmare." Overwhelmed with emotion, Jim broke down in tears, while Nancy remained inside, too devastated to face the outside world. Meanwhile, Glenelg Police Station was inundated with calls and visitors offering information. A line of people stretched 20 meters outside the station door, all wanting to share potential sightings or leads. However, the station was severely understaffed, with only 1 sergeant and 4 detectives trying to manage the overwhelming influx of tips. With just 1 typewriter available, recording statements was a slow and painstaking process. As the case escalated, police established roadblocks on major South Australian highways and increased security at Adelaide's airport and railway station. Volunteers joined the search, taxi drivers, who knew Jim Beaumont through work, cruised the streets in their cabs, while Jane's school friends rode their bikes through neighborhoods looking for their missing friend. One of the most significant early sightings came from a woman who reported seeing 3 children matching the Beaumont's description at 7 p.m. on the evening they vanished. The children were standing by the water's edge at the Patualonga Boat Haven, a marina about 1 kilometer north of Collie Reserve. The woman briefly spoke to them, and they told her they didn't live in the area. Given the high-profile nature of the case, police took no chances. The marina, which covered 70 acres with a depth of 6 feet, was completely drained for the first time since its establishment in 1959. It became one of the largest single searches in South Australia's history. 80 young police cadets waded through the thick, foul-smelling mud at the bottom, using broomsticks to prod for any sign of the missing children. But despite these efforts, no evidence was found. Investigators determined that the Beaumont children had left home carrying approximately 17 items, including bags, clothes, towels, and Jane's book and purse. None of these items were ever recovered, making it unlikely they had simply drowned. Had they gone into the water, their belongings would have been left behind on the sand. Within the first 48 hours, police received hundreds of calls from people claiming to have seen the 3 children. Most sightings led nowhere, but a few provided valuable leads. One witness reported seeing a man enter a vacant house with the 3 children, only for them to mysteriously disappear by the next day. Another claimed to have seen the children at a bus stop in Semaphore Park, accompanied by 2 men. With multiple corroborating statements, police reconstructed a likely timeline of the Beaumont children's last known movements. At approximately 10:15 a.m. on January 26, Jane, Arnna, and Grant boarded a public transit bus from Diagonal Road to Glenelg, as confirmed by the driver. An older couple on the bus recalled Jane sitting in the back, greeting a fellow passenger, while her younger siblings playfully stuck their arms out of the windows. Shortly after, the children disembarked on Mosley Street and were spotted walking toward the beach, hand in hand, by their family's postman, Tom Patterson. By 11 a.m., several witnesses saw them playing in the shallow waters north of Glenelg Jetty, the same area they had visited the previous day. Around 11:25 a.m., they moved to Collie Reserve, where they played under a water sprinkler to rinse off the sand. It was here that they were seen interacting with an unknown man. An elderly woman sitting on a nearby bench observed a tall, athletic man with suntanned skin and wavy blonde hair approach the children. He wore navy blue swim trunks with a white stripe. After speaking with the children, he placed his towel on the grass a few feet away and lay down, watching them. Within minutes, the children appeared comfortable with him. Jane playfully flicked him with her towel, and they began jumping over him. Around midday, the children entered Wenzel's cake shop on Mosley Street, where they often bought lunch. The shopkeeper, familiar with them, noticed something unusual. The children, who usually bought only a small meal, purchased 5 pasties, 6 finger buns, and 2 large bottles of soft drink. Even stranger, one of them mentioned, and a pie for the man. The bill was far more than what Nancy had given Jane for lunch and bus fare. Yet, when it came time to pay, Jane handed over a £1 note, an amount far greater than she was known to carry. It was the last confirmed sighting of the Beaumont children. That summer day was one of the hottest recorded in Adelaide, with temperatures soaring above 40 degrees Celsius 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Like many other families, Jane, Arnna, and Grant had planned a trip to Glenelg Beach, a popular spot for locals. They left their home in Somerton Park that morning and caught the 10 a.m. bus to the beach, as they had done before. By midday, the children were seen at Wenzel's Bakery on Mosley Street, a short walk from the beach. The shopkeeper, who had served them, later recalled that Jane paid for their pasties and drinks with a £1 note, an unusual amount of money for a child to have, as their mother had only given them coins. They were well-mannered and polite, the shopkeeper later recalled. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but I do remember thinking that the older girl was very responsible. She was the one in charge. Instead of heading straight to the bus stop after leaving the bakery, the children were spotted at Collie Reserve, near the Glenelg Surf Club building. Several witnesses recalled seeing them with a tall, blonde-haired man who appeared to be in his mid to late 30s. An elderly couple who had been sitting nearby later came forward, describing how the children appeared to be comfortable in the man's presence. They were laughing and playing together, the woman recalled. It was as if they knew him. There was no hesitation, no sign of fear. At one point, the man approached the couple and, within earshot of the children, asked if they had seen anyone going through his belongings. "Someone's nicked our money," he claimed. The couple found this odd, as he seemed more concerned about his things than the children did. Another woman, watching from a short distance away, provided further insight. She later told police that she had seen the man assisting Jane and Arnna as they put their shorts back on over their bathing suits. Jane was old enough to do that herself, she noted. It didn't seem right, but the children didn't seem distressed. They were acting normal, like they trusted him. The last confirmed sighting of the Beaumont children came at around 12:15 p.m. when the elderly couple, preparing to leave the reserve, glanced back and saw them still sitting on a bench outside the surf club. The man had gone inside the change sheds carrying only a towel and a pair of trousers. One final potential sighting came later that afternoon, though it remains unverified. A woman claimed to have seen 3 children matching the Beaumont's descriptions walking along Jetty Road, away from the beach. They were accompanied by a tall man who had his arms around them. The little boy was skipping ahead, but the 2 girls seemed quieter, she said. The older one was holding the man's hand. She thought little of it at the time, assuming they were just a family heading home after a day at the beach. But when news of the disappearance broke, she contacted police, certain that she had seen the missing children. Despite extensive searches and ongoing investigations, this was the last time Jane, Arnna, and Grant Beaumont were ever seen. Following the disappearance of the Beaumont children, police gathered descriptions from multiple witnesses who had seen them in the company of an unknown man at Glenelg Beach. He was described as being tall, around 6 feet, 183 centimeters, in height, with a slim to athletic build. Witnesses recalled his fair complexion, light-colored, neatly parted hair, and an appearance that suggested he was in his late 30s or early 40s. Some described him as being tanned, as though he spent a lot of time outdoors. Despite a widely circulated composite sketch, certain details, such as his eye color, any distinguishing marks, or the precise shape of his facial features, remained unclear. Some witnesses were too far away to provide exact details, while others only saw him briefly. The police sketch artist was forced to make educated assumptions in places where descriptions varied. Even so, the sketch was distributed across South Australia and beyond, appearing in newspapers, on television, and in police bulletins. The appeal for information led to another witness coming forward with an additional description. This person recalled seeing the same man days or weeks before the abduction, loitering around the beach, watching children as they played. The man never came forward to identify himself, nor did anyone recognize him definitively, leaving police to suspect that he was deliberately avoiding attention, possibly because he was involved in the children's disappearance. One of the most unsettling aspects of the case was that Jane, Arnna, and Grant did not appear to be afraid of the man. Onlookers at Glenelg Beach and Collie Reserve reported seeing the children interacting with him comfortably, suggesting that they knew him or had at least encountered him before. This revelation raised fears that the abductor had been watching the children for some time, possibly grooming them over multiple encounters at the beach. Grooming, a tactic used by predators to build trust before committing a crime, often involves small acts of kindness, gifts, or playful interactions that make children feel safe. The possibility of prior contact was reinforced by a seemingly innocent remark Jane had made to her mother in the weeks before the abduction. Nancy Beaumont later told investigators that her daughter had mentioned having a boyfriend at the beach. At the time, Nancy assumed this was just a child's way of describing a friendly acquaintance, but in retrospect, it became a chilling detail. If Jane had indeed befriended a man at the beach, he may have been carefully earning her trust in preparation for the events of January 26, 1966. Another crucial witness was the woman who had seen the unknown man assisting Jane and Arnna as they put their shorts on over their bathing suits. This struck her as odd because Jane, at 9 years old, was more than capable of dressing herself. She later reported that Jane did not appear uncomfortable or resistant. If anything, she seemed relaxed, as though she trusted the man completely. This observation deeply troubled Nancy Beaumont. She described her daughter as a modest and reserved girl who would never allow a stranger to help her dress. Jane was shy. She wouldn't let just anyone touch her, especially not like that, Nancy said in an interview. If she let that man help her, she must have known him. This small but significant moment supported the growing belief that the suspect had developed a relationship with the children before taking them. It also suggested that, when they left the beach, they did so willingly, without fear or hesitation. Police theorized that the man may have carefully orchestrated the abduction by using a psychological trick to appear trustworthy. Some believe that he intentionally staged the missing money incident at Collie Reserve, asking nearby adults if they had seen anyone take his things while ensuring the children overheard. This would have made him seem like a victim rather than a threat, reinforcing the idea that he was someone they could trust. Another disturbing clue was the £1 note Jane used at the bakery. Her parents had only given the children coins for their outing, yet Jane had a note, suggesting that the man had given it to her. This act may have been his way of asserting control over them, ensuring their loyalty while subtly reinforcing his influence. The scenario that investigators considered most likely was that the man, after winning their trust, offered to give them a lift home. Because the children seemed at ease in his presence, they may have willingly accepted the offer, believing that he was a friend. Investigators believed the suspect may have used deception to manipulate the children. Some theorized that he stole their money, then feigned concern by asking bystanders about the missing cash, ensuring the children saw him as a helpful and trustworthy figure. Additionally, the £1 note Jane used at the bakery, far more than the children typically carried, suggested that he may have given it to them as a final act of control. One likely scenario was that, after gaining their trust, the man offered the children a ride home. Given that they left the area without any sign of distress, it seemed plausible that they willingly accompanied him, unaware of the danger. Jim Beaumont believed abduction was the only explanation for their disappearance, telling the media, someone must be holding the children against their will. Otherwise they would have come home by now. He suspected the perpetrator had observed his children over time, waiting for the right moment to strike. The abductor may have lured them into his vehicle by claiming their parents had been in an accident or offering to take them to see their father. Nancy Beaumont feared her children were being held captive and suffering. In a heartbreaking interview, she told a journalist, "I think as a mother, I'd rather kill the children myself and get it over quickly than have them at the mercy of some bad person for so long." The possibility that the Beaumont children had been abducted by a pedophile gripped the nation, sending waves of fear and outrage through the Australian public. Parents became more protective of their children, and beaches, once considered safe havens for family outings, were suddenly viewed with suspicion. Stranger danger warnings became widespread, and the case marked a turning point in the way Australian society viewed child safety in public spaces. As the days passed with no sign of Jane, Arnna, or Grant, newspapers fueled the growing sense of dread. The Sunday Mail ran a chilling headline, "Sex Crime Now Feared," reflecting police concerns that the children had likely been abducted and possibly murdered. The lack of ransom demands, the absence of communication from the children, and the eerie calmness with which they were last seen suggested a calculated crime rather than a random abduction. The case was soon compared to another unsolved tragedy, the brutal slayings of 15-year-old best friends Marianne Schmidt and Christine Chirac at Wanda Beach in New South Wales just a year prior. The girls had been murdered in a remote sand dune area, and their killer had never been identified. Some speculated that a serial predator might be targeting children and teenagers across Australia, though no solid link between the cases was ever established. By the fifth day of the search, the case had reached fever pitch. South Australian police were flooded with over 1,000 phone calls from concerned citizens, witnesses, and self-proclaimed psychics. Reports placed the missing children in locations as far away as rural New South Wales and Victoria. Some claimed to have spotted them boarding an airplane, while others swore they had seen them in a car traveling interstate. Each tip was investigated thoroughly, but none led to the missing siblings. As investigators narrowed their focus to the unknown man last seen with the children, they scoured criminal records, particularly targeting known sex offenders in the Holdfast Bay area, a region that included Glenelg Beach and its surroundings. However, most of these individuals had alibis for the time of the abduction, frustrating efforts to identify a suspect. Still, authorities were convinced that the man seen with the children was a local resident or someone highly familiar with the area. This theory stemmed from the fact that the suspect carried only a towel and trousers, an odd choice for someone traveling from afar. A visitor would typically have a bag, change of clothes, or other beach accessories. This led police to believe he lived nearby or had access to a property in the region where he could have taken the children. With no new leads, police turned their attention to abandoned buildings, vacant lots, and isolated homes that could have been used to conceal the children. Detective Sergeant Alex Palmer made a public plea, urging locals to check any vacant properties, sheds, or abandoned structures for any sign of the Beaumonts. There are many vacant homes, both old and new, in the Glenelg area, Palmer told reporters. The children could have been lured inside, and anything could have happened. This appeal resonated with the public, and many residents joined the search, checking their neighborhoods for anything unusual. Unfortunately, the efforts turned up nothing. And as the days stretched into weeks, the chilling reality became harder to ignore: the Beaumont children were gone, and their fate remained unknown. Weeks went by without any trace of the Beaumont children. Initially, the South Australian government offered a £500 reward, but this was soon deemed inadequate. Local businesses and residents raised the amount, pushing it over £10,000. In a desperate attempt to help bring his children home, Jim Beaumont even offered to sell his house to increase the reward fund. However, the media frenzy surrounding the case only added to the distress, sparking a wave of false reports and hoaxes. Newspapers and news outlets ran sensationalized stories, often with little evidence, which led to public confusion and frustration. Strangers appeared at the Beaumonts' home with supposed visions, psychic readings, and religious prophecies, claiming to know the children's whereabouts. Some even went as far as accusing Jim and Nancy of being involved in the disappearance of their own children, suggesting motives ranging from financial gain to hidden family secrets. One particularly cruel hoax involved a man with a foreign accent who called the newspaper, claiming he was holding the children for ransom. When asked to speak to the editorial team, he abruptly hung up and was never heard from again. The call was quickly dismissed as a copycat attempt of the infamous 1960 kidnapping of Sydney schoolboy Graham Thorne. Media outlets quickly issued retractions and warned the public against paying attention to baseless claims, but the damage had already been done. In addition to the phone hoax, another false lead came from Adelaide resident Perling Grover, who claimed to have seen 3 children matching the Beaumonts' descriptions being driven by a lone man. He alleged the man forced him at gunpoint to fill his car radiator with water before fleeing to the Barossa Valley. Grover's story gained brief attention from local papers, but his later admission that he had been drunk and fabricated the entire tale caused a scandal. He and a friend were prosecuted for making false claims, and the media condemned their actions as part of the growing issue of misleading information surrounding the case. Throughout this time, various media outlets published speculative articles that added to the growing public pressure on law enforcement. Newspapers printed images of the children and printed emotional appeals, often without any concrete updates from the police. Some articles sensationalized potential leads, such as reports of the children being seen in various places or even abroad. These reports, while sometimes coming from well-meaning sources, often misled the public and diverted attention away from the real investigation. As the media frenzy escalated, it became increasingly difficult to discern what was true and what was fabricated. The constant stream of false leads, hoaxes, and misleading articles only deepened the emotional turmoil for the Beaumont family, further complicating the search for their children. The damage done by the media's unverified claims also raised important questions about the responsibility of the press in reporting on such sensitive matters. In 1998, Arthur Stanley Brown, then 86, was arrested in Townsville, Queensland, for the 1970 murders of Judith and Susan McKay. This arrest, stemming from a Crime Stoppers episode, unearthed a history of sexual assault and rape involving numerous minors, including his stepchildren. However, the investigation's implications extended beyond the McKay sisters' case, connecting Brown to another notorious unsolved disappearance, the Beaumont children. The McKay sisters, aged 7 and 5, vanished on August 26, 1970, and their bodies were found 2 days later. Witness testimonies placed them with a man in a blue Vauxhall sedan, a vehicle Brown owned. Witnesses described the driver, and notably, the car had a mismatched door panel, a detail consistent with Brown's vehicle. The subsequent trial, while ultimately inconclusive due to a hung jury and Brown's declining mental state, revealed disturbing connections. The widespread media coverage of Brown's arrest and trial triggered a crucial lead. A woman came forward, claiming Brown was the man she'd seen with Joanne Ratcliffe, 11, and Kirst Gordon, 4, abducted from Adelaide Oval in 1973. This revelation sparked renewed interest in the theory that the same individual was responsible for the Ratcliffe-Gordon abduction and the earlier disappearance of the Beaumont children in 1966. Crucially, an identikit picture and an artist's impression released during the Ratcliffe-Gordon investigation bore a striking resemblance to the identikit of the alleged Beaumont children kidnapper, and all sketches resembled Arthur Stanley Brown. This connection was further strengthened by a witness recalling Brown mentioning the near-complete Adelaide Festival Centre, placing him in Adelaide around the time of the 1973 abduction. Brown's employment as a maintenance carpenter for the Department of Public Works from 1946 to 1977 gave him unsupervised access to public buildings. The lack of records regarding his holidays made it impossible to definitively rule him out as a suspect in the Beaumont children's disappearance. The connection to the Beaumont children case, while never definitively proven, placed Arthur Stanley Brown at the centre of two of Australia's most haunting unsolved mysteries. While Queensland police closed the Mackay sisters case, believing Brown was responsible, his possible involvement in the Adelaide abductions, including the Beaumont children, remains a chilling and unresolved aspect of his criminal history. Despite the relentless efforts of both the police and the public, no trace of the Beaumont children was ever found. Over the years, numerous suspects emerged, ranging from notorious criminals to alleged child predators, but no concrete evidence ever linked any of them to the case. The disappearance of Jane, Arnna, and Grant Beaumont sparked widespread fear and led to increased scrutiny of known offenders, though each lead proved to be a dead end. As the investigation dragged on, theories continued to evolve. Some suggested that the children had been abducted by someone they knew, while others speculated that a stranger may have been responsible. Notorious figures like child murderer and serial rapist Raymond John "Mad Dog" Martin were mentioned in media reports, though there was never any solid evidence to connect them to the Beaumont case. Over time, these speculations only deepened the mystery, but still, the disappearance remained unsolved. The case altered the social fabric of Australia in profound ways. The disappearance of the Beaumont children marked a defining moment in our nation's history, said crime historian Peter Dutton. It was the catalyst for a societal shift, where the concept of stranger danger became a part of everyday life. Parents became far more protective, and children were no longer allowed the same freedoms they once had. The sense of safety and freedom children had once enjoyed began to erode, with many families becoming much more cautious about allowing their children to play or walk unaccompanied. Public service campaigns warning of the dangers posed by strangers began to emerge, reflecting the fear and uncertainty that permeated the country. The mystery of the Beaumont children's disappearance continues to haunt the nation. Decades after the event, new theories and alleged sightings continue to surface, keeping the case alive in the public imagination. Some claim to have seen the children in remote areas or even abroad, but none of these stories have been substantiated. With each new theory, the line between fact and fiction has become increasingly blurred, leaving many to wonder if the truth will ever be uncovered. The mystery continues to captivate people's minds because there's no definitive answer, said criminologist Dr. Helen Shaw. It's one of those cases that just doesn't let go. For Jim and Nancy Beaumont, the pain of losing their children never truly faded. Despite their tireless search for answers, they spent the remainder of their lives living in quiet sorrow. "We never stopped hoping," Jim Beaumont said in a rare interview years later. But after a while, you learn to live with the emptiness. The emotional toll of their loss was evident in the years that followed, as they both retreated from the public eye, forever haunted by the disappearance. As the years pass, the question remains as haunting as ever: what really happened to Jane, Arnna, and Grant Beaumont? The case remains an open wound in the heart of Australia, with no closure in sight. And with each passing year, the hope for answers grows dimmer, yet the mystery endures, as unresolved and unsettling as the day the children vanished.